Audioversity, the voice of Reichman University.
כל האוניברסיטה Audioversity.
Sitting with this old lady who suffered, everything, Holocaust, the Israeli wars, loss, and she was like gray from sorrow. And she said, I don't want to live in a world with such cruelty inside of it. And I told her, I said her name, and I said, please look around you and tell me, is this a world that you would want to live in? And she looked, as you did at night, she was raising her head and she was looking, gazing around, and it was loaded with things that people gave, food, clothes, and volunteers from all kinds. And then she had tears in her eyes, but good tears. And she said, I don't know where these angels came from. I told myself this is like Inferno and Heaven in the same floor, strange floor in David Hotel in the Dead Sea, and this is life.
Welcome to Raw, a podcast where we confront the complexities of war from the inside out. I'm Anouk, a journalist, author, yoga teacher, and meditation practitioner. Raw, or war spelled backwards, symbolizes how many of us feel in the face of the Israel-Gaza conflict, exposed, vulnerable, and seeking understanding. Here, we don't just discuss the external battles, but dive deep into our internal struggles, examining how this violence has shaken our very core. Join me in conversations with philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual leaders as we explore how to navigate these painful times with wisdom and resilience, finding guidance for our own paths through this raw, unfiltered world. Today, I'm speaking with Professor Merav Roth, who is a clinical psychologist, a trainer of psychoanalysts, and an interdisciplinary researcher of psychoanalysis and literature. In our conversation, Merav speaks about her experience driving down to the Dead Sea on October 8th to be with the survivors of Kibbutz Beeri, families who were going through the worst horrors imaginable, and the guidelines she created for therapists dealing with the ongoing trauma. She ended up staying there for weeks and has since been working to help bereaved families and children, hostage families, and hostages who have returned from Gaza. She also speaks about her own resilience, ingrained in her by her famous family. And we speak about the obligation to continue to live life from a place of deep compassion and self-compassion. Merav, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to start with something a little different today. I thought we would do a little check-in. So I'll go first.
Good.
I just dropped off my kids. My son wouldn't say goodbye to me. He was angry with me because I insist that he do a private English class at home. My husband is American. I'm Belgian. I speak French with him. My husband speaks English, but I want him to learn to read and write in English, and he was angry with me. And so for the first time since he was born, he went away and he didn't want to say goodbye, and he just So we're here to talk about such serious, big, gut-wrenching, life-turning events, and yet we all at any given point come into every moment also with so much stuff.
That's true.
So I'm just kind of feeling a little bit of sadness, and then a little bit of guilt also that my sadness is directed at such a simple thing and not at the enormity of the war or that, the tragedy that others are going through. So there's a little bit of that. And then there's meeting you for the first time. How are you this morning? What are you coming in with?
First of all, I think that what you're saying is so true about all of us now, including me. But I will begin with what you're saying because, in therapy, in analysis, people come these days at the beginning of the war, but also in like general heavy days like Yom Kippur or whatever, and Yom HaZikaron. And they say, how can I speak about these small things now? I feel guilty to even think about it. And I always tell them, we are trying to allow ourselves to live our lives. And we do feel guilty for the privilege to just live our lives, to feel sorry that your son left and didn't say goodbye nicely to his mother because he was angry. These small gifts of life, and it's very, very hard these days to combine. I was just launching a new book, The True Love is the Love of Truth, Ahavat Emet Ke'ahavat Ha'emet, which has a lot to do with everything. But I was really ambivalent about celebrating the publishing of the book because now, and this woman wrote to me in Facebook, isn't it the banality of evil? She said, to think about love and truth in these days when in Gaza, this and that. And I wrote to her, and I really believe it, that I was also ambivalent. I asked myself the same question, and then I thought, no, quite the other way around. We need to meditate about love. We need to meditate about truth and about connectedness now more than ever. So I'm holding the same combination, fragile combination.
What's interesting to me is I think that war is kind of like taking a deck of cards and throwing it all up in the air and then just having to see where things land. You kind of think of everything anew, things that we didn't necessarily have to think about, our identities as Jews, as Israelis, as women, our place in the world, our ability to help, our powerlessness, our desire to feel joy despite it all. I mean, there's so much internally that's happening, and that's why I call this podcast Raw, which is war backwards, because I think that's how so many of us are going about our daily lives is feeling completely raw. And yet a lot of people, I think, maybe have an ambivalent also feeling towards that rawness. They maybe don't really want to feel it. There's this quote by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a psychiatrist, and she used to tell people, I'm not okay, and you're not okay, and that's okay. We're all not okay, and that's really okay. And I want to say that to our listeners also, that whatever they come in with, whatever you're coming in with, when you're listening to this podcast at this very moment, whatever you are coming in with, whether it's absolute joy because you've just celebrated an anniversary or because you've just done something great or you've had a great night's sleep, or whether it's whether you're distraught or whether you feel like you're unworthy or not good enough, or whether you're feeling sad or whatever it is you're coming in with, that is absolutely welcome and okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about your work these last few months, because you've really stepped up in so many ways. And we were talking on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and you told me everything that you'd been doing, and I said, wow. How are you doing all that? I mean, aren't you kind of running out of steam? And you told me that's just how you operate since forever. You you kind of feel the call, the hour of need, and you just step in. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
When I teach, I say about what you said just now about everything is okay, or we're okay by also being not okay. I always say that refusing or denying what is going on takes a lot of energy. Mm. And Melanie Klein was saying that we have like two possible attitudes. One is to refuse, whatever is going on by our defensive mechanisms, primitive defensive mechanism of splitting and denial and projection. You're bad, I'm good. The world is black and white. Da, da, da. And the other way is to what you said, to accept what is. I call it in Hebrew להסכין עם המציאות, which is an overall acceptance that includes in להסכין there is sakana and miskenut and sochnut. There is feeling sorry or sad and feeling the dangers in life, but also having the agency to confront it and to take care of it. So I teach it, and I wrote a poem that Shlomo Gronich was composing and singing, and it's called Kacha ze achshav. That's how it is now. And it was about being old. He called me and he said, listen, I'm old. No one talks about it. No one writes about it. Please write a song about it. And I said, wow, that's challenging. And then the war came, and I keep on saying, Kacha ze achshav. First of all, we need to know where we are. Kacha ze achshav. That's how it is now. And then to confront it and to do our best to take care of everything that we can take care of, and to differentiate what we cannot take care of.
It's the serenity prayer that you just reminded me of. It says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly. And this is crucial in traumatic events and in traumatic times, because, for instance, watching the Instagram horrendous films from October 7, people are going there and they're watching it, and they're going to the place where they have no control, where they lost all control when the most traumatic thing happened. So, and they unconsciously they think, okay, I will go there and I will amend it, I will correct it, I will repair something. But you cannot. It's in the past. It's terrible. But now, if you in Hebrew I say lit achshev, to come to now. But now you have a lot that you can control, that you can contribute to. So this movement, we need to all the time take care of it gently.
I do think a lot of people who might be listening, a lot of people have anxiety, and anxiety is just, the mind attaching itself to some thought that is not right now. Yes. Right? Unless there is a siren and we have to run to the shelter, or there is some emergency.
But then it's not anxiety.
Right.
It's fear, and it's concrete, and it's good because it's signaling what we need to do.
So anyway, that was a sidetrack. But tell us a little bit about your work, your very difficult work. Dealing with people who have been bereaved and have lost everything in the most traumatic of ways.
Yeah. So first of all, on October 8th, I called a therapist from the South, asking her if she thinks that the therapists there would want like a Zoom event with me, just telling them how do we deal with this terrible event now. And she said, yes, of course. And 2 hours, there were like dozens of therapists. And I wrote 10 guidelines of how to meet the people in this very, very traumatic moment.
So we're talking about the people, the first circle. So those are the people who were directly...
who were in the massacre, who were really attacked themselves, their families, lost family members, kidnapped family members. Actually, in the beginning, most of them didn't know what is going on with some members of the family because they were missing. And then the day after, I went somehow coincidentally, because my daughter Netta Roth, she's an actress. She's a young actress, and she does this TV series, Levad Babayit, Alone at Home, that children love. So at noon, I called her and I said, Netta, where are you? She said, I'm on my way to the Dead Sea. And I said, what? Sirens, war. I said, what are you? And she said, I wrote on Facebook in the morning, where do children need me most? And someone said, the Dead Sea. So I'm on the way to the Dead Sea.
Wow. And
my husband is a psychologist too. So I said, listen, Danny, I think Netta is right. We need to go to the Dead Sea. And we went. And I told him, I have these 10 guidelines, and I'm sure therapists are already gathering there. Let's go, and I'll try to help too. And I thought, I took a small bag. I thought we're coming back that night, tomorrow. And we stayed for 2 weeks. We couldn't move. It was, I will never forget these weeks.
So just for context, the Dead Sea was where some of the hotels were, where a lot of the people from the south were evacuated.
Yeah. The people from, we went to David Hotel, where the people from Beeri Kibbutz, which is one of the kibbutz that was massacred in the most brutal, terrible way. So they were evacuated there on October 8th. And we met them, and it was like inferno, and people were... It's interesting. I think people imagine wild atmosphere, but it was so quiet. It was so quiet. They were like shadows. They were really, really shocked. Many of them were like 20 hours under fire, houses burned. They're inside waiting for someone. So, we know the details, but each time we think about it, it's very hard to capture.
So, in your life prior to October 7th, I imagine that most of the time when you're meeting people that you're helping, they come in with things that happened to them, in the past, and somehow they make their way to you. In this case, you saw almost trauma as it was happening.
It's true and not true, because I'm working with parents for small children who died by coincidence, like were stayed in the car and died or drowned in the Zimmer, and they usually come immediately. So I think it's not by coincidence that I went there and that I felt that I have something to give, including my second generation history. And I lost my sister when I was 18. So I know trauma intergenerationally, personally, and then I'm working with traumatic loss for many years. And they tell each other during the Shiva, and they come right after. So I do meet people for many years in the midst of hell, But at the same time, it's not 1,000 people, and it's not a whole community. It was very, very, very strong, and we just founded like a small organization inside the hotel, 40 therapists, and we started working with individuals, with groups. We founded groups for each age, and for the foreign workers, for the elderly, for mothers, for babies, etc. And I was working with the leadership of the kibbutz, who had these very challenging questions, like a family where 2 kids lost their 2 parents and 2 brothers. Do we tell them each time differently? Do we bury them each time, the one that we know about, or do we wait for, unbearable questions, but we had to face them. And also, since I work and think all the time about ourselves as like living between life instinct and death instinct. From the first moment, I told the therapists, and I met the people with a smile. We were speaking about my smile, saying, good morning, smiling. This is already therapeutic. You can give something immediately, because inside these people, like in you, they also ask themselves, do we have a right to smile? Do we have a right to wake up in the morning while we are here and we don't know what about our children or our father, our grandfather? Do we have a right to breathe? And I kept telling them in every manner I could, of course you have. That's your obligation. And we don't want to die from sorrow. We want to live with sorrow. And sorrow is part of life. But so it's a practice that we really worked with from the first moment, very, very strongly. It was like a proactive psychoanalysis, which is not the usual method. It was proactive. And from there, it went that I started working with the officers of the intelligence forces and with the psychologists of the army, and then with Mate HaMishpachot, with the organization that works with the families of the kidnapped hostages, with the hostages. And I also founded with two friends of mine, Ofrit Shapira-Berman and Iris Gavriel-Yerchabi. So we founded an organization, hundreds of analysts that are working from really the beginning of war with the families of the murdered and the families of the hostages, and after 50 days also with the freed hostages that we are working with.
Is there one or two stories that you can share from that time that really stayed with you and that really maybe changed the way you view things or taught you something about the work you're doing?
I think, there is a story that I keep telling, but I will tell it again because it happened. There were two stories that happened the first day, so they were very strong in me. One is a girl that told me, I feel guilty. She just said it. She was, I think, 9 or 10, because all my family is alive and here. And I asked her, wow, do you think that if a friend of yours would not be in Beeri on October 7th and she wouldn't even experience all that, you would be angry with her? And she was smiling and she said no. And she said a name of a friend of hers who is abroad. And she's abroad and I'm so happy that she didn't experience it. And I said, so can you please be as generous to yourself as to your friend and know that it's so fine, so good that everybody, and you have more strength and you can help your friends and that's good. And she was like relieved. So small story. And another one was sitting with this old lady who suffered, everything, Holocaust, the Israeli wars, loss. And she was like gray from sorrow, and she said, I don't want to live in a world with such cruelty inside of it. And I told her, I said her name, and I said, please look around you and tell me, is this a world that you would want to live in? And she looked, as you did at night, she was raising her head and she was gazing around, and it was the basement floor of the hotel, and it was loaded with things that people gave, food, clothes, and volunteers from all kinds. And then she had tears in her eyes, but good tears, and she said, I don't know where these angels came from. Oh. And I said, well, so this is also the world you live in, right? And it was very strong for me to feel how the life instinct wants us to give it a hand and to pull it back to action. And I told myself, this is like Inferno and heaven in the same floor, strange floor in David Hotel in the Dead Sea, and this is life, and that's where we are, in the most extreme place of of our being.
That's so interesting, and it makes me think about the negativity bias, which is ingrained in human psychology since we were around millions of years ago, and made sense because we were not the apex predator, and we were living amongst other predators, and we had to be careful. We had to make sure the lion wasn't eating us. And so our human psychology kind of evolved to look for potential negative, dangerous things. And even today, that's what, in our modern society, a lot of people are stuck in that kind of fight, flight, freeze mode that is really more appropriate for when a lion is coming to eat you, or, God forbid, when a Hamas terrorist is entering Israel. In those moments, the fight, flight, freeze is one of the most extraordinary methods that humans have invented, to raise adrenaline and to run and to survive. But we're stuck in that mode a lot of the time because social media, for example, we just, like you said, we keep reliving it and reliving it and reliving it. And our minds have that ability, that kind of extraordinary but dangerous ability to feel like we're still in that moment. And I think it's important to continue to come back to the present, like you allowed that older lady to do, and in any given moment to look around us and to say, right now, my body is safe. My children are safe right now. I can make decisions about the future, etc. But right now, I'm safe. And I think you'll tell me if I'm right, but I believe that a lot of Israeli society, not even the people who have gone through the worst of the trauma, but a lot of Israeli society is stuck in that fight, flight, freeze mode.
Yeah, I think in general, the time zone is very strange in traumatic periods. It's like going very fast and very, very slow at the same time, and we all feel it's October 7, like an ongoing October 7. And also because the hostages are still there, we cannot. It's a very complicated trauma, because trauma usually, and that is a differentiation from the traumas that I'm dealing with throughout my lifetime of work. I think that when the trauma is ended and you can begin to mourn and you know where you are. But I'm working with a family, the hostages family organization, and I'm working with the freed hostages. So when I'm sitting with a freed hostage, a mother of 2 children who came with them back from Gaza and with her mother, and she tells me, I cannot begin anything because my husband is still there. She cannot begin to mourn. She said, I cannot begin to mourn about my murdered father until my husband will come back. So it's so challenging for the mind to hold all this complexity. And I think all the Israelis feel the same, that they cannot really step forward when the hostages are kept in captivity. It's mind-blowing. If we would really concentrate it, we would all shout all the time. So we are holding ourselves in one piece, and as we said, we need to keep our strength and our positive thinking deeply. I don't mean shallow positive thinking, but really concentrating on what is important in life and why it is important to keep connecting to solidarity and to care and to empathize with the other in general, and etc. But it's very challenging because it's not ended. It's still going on. But I do think that we all the time have the life instinct at our service, and also intergenerational traumas at our service, to remember that we do have. Whenever we think there is no strength anymore, there is more. There is more. There is more, and it keeps us going and needs to keep us going.
When you say intergenerational trauma at our service, you mean that looking at what our forefathers have gone through and taking resilience from that.
Yes, there was one moment in the Dead Sea. I went with my husband. We did I don't know how you say bitter. When you tell a family that you found out that his family member died. So there was this unit. We went from family to tell them whenever they identified a body. And there were these two kids that I was talking about beforehand, that their father, mother, and two brothers died. And we went there to say that the father was identified. All of a sudden, I thought, wow, Danny's father lost his parents. My father lost his father in the Holocaust. And we are there in the room. These kids lost their father now. And I said, like to the air, I said, you know, kids, Danny's father and my father, they also lost their parents in the Holocaust. And they were happy people. They were fat, happy. They had us as kids. They had grandchildren. They had a meaning in their lives. So you need to know that. And I just said it. I knew that they cannot really concentrate on what I'm saying. Maybe not even listening, but their unconscious is there and it's listening. It's like when we interpret in therapy, we don't care if your conscious listens. We don't care if your unconscious listens. So it was a strong moment for me to really feel that the trauma of the past helps me to give them something and to know for them that they do have a future, even after the most terrible traumas. You do have a future if you metabolize deeply what you went through, which is our job as therapists in Israel now, to work with all these thousands and thousands of people to metabolize, to work through their losses and their and as you said, their identity crisis, etc., etc.
Where do you think that your strength comes from? You're clearly an extremely resilient oak. You don't look like a no petite woman, but you're
don't
like
say oak to a woman.
Oak of a person. You know, an oak tree is just like, you know, unshakable. You can have like, you know, the wind can blow in any direction and the leaves will rustle, but the core is there. So it was a compliment to your psyche.
It's okay.
Where does that strength come from? Is it genetic? Is it your environment when you grew up as a child? How do you not break dealing with the most horrendous of circumstances?
I think it's both. I think it's both genetic. My brother wrote a book about my father's life named "Memories After My Death."
Your brother Yair Lapid, about your father.
That's true. That's true. And he writes there in the name of my father because it's like my father's telling his story. It's like an autobiography that was told before for my father. So he said there, people are optimistic because they were born optimistic. So there is this genetic thing, I guess. But also I think I was raised in a family where my father talked about his traumas openly. And he allowed himself to feel everything. He cried, he laughed, he loved everything very strong. He was angry sometimes, very strong, not towards us. He treated his family like holding, I don't know, a pea in his palm of his
jewel,
yeah, like a precious jewel, but outside in politics and stuff. So everything was out in the open and was there for us to contemplate on and to speak about it. And I think it's similar because I can sit with a patient or with the people I work with now, of course, and tears will go down my face, and so I do feel deep sorrow sometimes, but I also feel deep love and deep connectedness. And I think the integration of all of that gives us strength, gives us resilience.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you and I hear my question to you, I can imagine that there are listeners who don't feel that resilience and who might, hear about the things that you're doing and thinking like, wow, that's extraordinary. And if someone else is doing that and I'm not, then I'm not good enough. And that's again coming back to that place of where are we now? Who are we? What is the baggage that we come with? What is the genetic makeup that we come with and the history that we were born through and with? And I think from that place, we can each find what in all absolute authenticity we can be and do that is of service. And that could be being of service to ourselves. It can be being of service to others. It has to come from a place of authenticity. And it can be as simple as smiling to someone in the street, as being kind to the cashier at the supermarket, as taking a deep breath and allowing ourselves to go out for a walk or for a massage when we feel like we need it. I think that's important to say because, I'm speaking with people like you who have extraordinary resilience because I want to talk about the tools that people can learn from that. And at the same time, I want people to know, again, it's okay to just be not okay.
Yes.
So I'm coming back to that as well.
Yes. You're so kind. You keep on thinking about the people who listen and wanting to help them. That's so sweet. Yeah, I guess you're so right. I feel lucky that I can do because it's my work. It's what I do, and I think it's very, very true that people must allow themselves. It's important that we also have normality. It's important if people want to go to a concert or to sit in a cafe with a friend and not being of service at that moment. That is being of service. This is very important. We otherwise the Hamas won.
As a psychoanalyst, I wanted to ask you about men in politics. But then, of course, I'm thinking about your brother, Yair Lapid, and I don't want to make it awkward. But I often have this feeling, based on what I'm seeing, that politicians, and most of them are men, and that's why I said men in politics, but politicians, they might be very smart, and they might have a lot of knowledge. But a lot of the times, it looks to me like their egos have not evolved. Like their egos are still stuck in the childhood playground, in the, you did it to me, so I'm going to do it to you. I'm going to show you who is more powerful. I'm wounded in my ego because years ago someone said something to me, and therefore now I always want to show everybody that that I'm in control and I'm in power and I'm going to put you down. And I'm just wondering, when you have both, you're a psychologist, but you also have in your family someone who's in politics. When you look at that, and most of the people in politics, do you have that same feeling that they all need a lot of therapy?
I think most of the people could find therapy useful. I think what I would want for a politician is to have, not to be smart, but to have wisdom. And there's a big difference. And I sit with Yair every Tuesday, just the two of us, to think. You need to go to think on what is going on and to combine wisdom with ethical standards, with ethical attitude. And for that, you really need to be more mature psychologically. I agree with you on that. And I think it's a very fast world. And it's all, the sad thing is that it's going with rating, because elections is about rating. And you need to be very, very strong in order not to let this lead your way, but to keep thinking what is really, really the best thing for our people and for our minds and for our psychological resilience. And to let this be your anchor and your
compass.
Yes, compass, exactly. So it's challenging. It's a very tough world. It's a very I don't envy them. It's a very tough world. Yair is very strong. He's a very, very strong personality, and he's very strong in knowing that he will not move one step far from what he believes in.
I want to go to a point which is extremely, I think, sensitive, and which I do try to come back to in my podcasts, even though I feel like that's the kind of shadow that we don't want to look at and don't want to talk about, which is the suffering that's happening in Gaza right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that anything that we kind of put in a little box and close and aren't willing to face ends up eating us up. We live in a world where, like you said, everything is us versus them. We're so wounded as a nation, as a religion, as an ethnicity, in our psyche, not only by what happened on October 7th, but by the enormous rise in anti-Semitism and delegitimization and non-truths that are being told. That I feel like we were tracked into kind of a kind of child that feels that, it's we're right, they're wrong, and as a result we dehumanize.
Mm-hmm.
And I see almost nothing about the suffering happening in Gaza on Israeli TV. If I read about it, it's through the New York Times or international channels that I feel like Israelis aren't getting.
It's complicated because I think the reason that they don't show it to us now is that many young people are at war now, fighting, and it's very difficult to hold everything together. I think if the soldiers or the soldiers' parents would think about each person that is wounded or being killed and concentrated on it, it would be very, very challenging to keep fighting, and we need to fight because the people of Beeri have a right to go back home. And the situation is so terrible because these people are really they die without being, most of them, without being guilty of anything but growing up in Gaza. And I think what the world does not understand is the difference, but also the Israelis sometimes, the difference between Hamas and the Gaza people, and between the religious crazy fanatics and the regular people in Gaza. And that's horrid. And Hamas is also, in this sense, Hamas was slaughtering their people as our people. They are to be accused of what is going on in Gaza. And I think we need to cry about each child that dies in the world, including the children of Gaza. So we are in an absolutely impossible situation. If we don't attack, we are attacked. So it is the most primitive thing of their children in front or our children. Yeah. It's terrible. And I do agree with you deeply that we need to remember that the children of Gaza were not born. We can be born optimistic. We are not born murderers. They are not murderers. They're children. And that's so terribly, terribly sad what is going on there. And women, it's so absurd that we are, to this point, the same bloodshed for years and years and years. It's like, sometimes I ask myself, from the Bible, didn't we learn anything? Just, circles, vicious circles of bloodshed, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like the, millennia of evolution and enlightenment and Freud and, all of that. And we're just back here. We're back in the biblical stories.
There is a small correspondence between Freud and Einstein. And they asked them, it's called War Why. They asked each other, why there are still wars? And Freud says, until men will know that violence is within them and that they project it on the other and then try to murder the other because he's now we projected on him our own violence. Until we acknowledge that, wars will continue, which is so beautiful that we, if each of us will know that there is life instinct and death instinct inside of us, there is violence and there is compassion inside of us and also in the other, then we cannot dehumanize anyone and we can be compassionate even about the other's violence, but speak about it and negotiate about it instead of projecting all evil on the other and then try to kill this evil that we just projected.
And that's why I think, I come back to that idea that if only politicians on all sides went, to sit on the couch for a few months and
can we do it few years?
a few years and analyze their own, internal violence and the projections that how they project it onto others, I think we would be in a much, much better place. I just want to end with these couple of quotes that always speak to me. Is just a sentence by Khalil Gibran, who says, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." And it brings me back also to that story of those two boys who lost everything, and my prayer for them that the suffering, the trauma will not only be a burden to bear, but something that will bring out of them their most extraordinary compassion and love of life. And then there's this quote by Rumi who says, "Keep your eye on the wounded place. That's where the light shines through." And
that's beautiful.
I just want to leave, like you said, I'm thinking about our listeners, and I just want to leave them with these two quotes. And is there anything that you would like to share to people, with people who are listening, based on your experience these last few months, some words of hope?
I think that the hope I get is from the people who were under the most terrible attack, and their eyes are full with compassion to each other. The communities are working together so beautifully, and they give me strength. They show me how one can really rise up to its best option in order to survive the worst situation.
Thank you so much, Merav. I appreciate you coming in. It's such a pleasure speaking with you.
And thank you. It's a pleasure speaking with you too.
Thank you for listening. This has been Raw. To listen to more of our episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Anouk Glory. Goodbye.